At the settlement hearing, my wife claimed she deserved my inheritance. We were married when he received it, she argued. The judge seemed to consider it. Then I showed him my father's will. Every asset was in an irrevocable trust, untouchable. The judge actually smiled and said, "Nice try, counselor." Monica's lawyer stood up in the courtroom at 10:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning and said the words I'd been dreading for 6 months. "Your Honor, my client is entitled to half of the marital estate, which includes the $8 million inheritance Mr. Warren received during the marriage. $8 million. Half of everything my father had spent 40 years building. $4 million for a woman who'd filed for divorce 11 days after his funeral. 11 days. Monica was sitting 3 feet away from me, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Designer, probably bought specifically for this hearing, with fresh manipulations and hair that had clearly been done that morning. She looked like she was attending a business meeting where she was about to close a very profitable deal. Her attorney, Marcus Webb, 52 years old according to the bio on his firm's website, specialist in high-asset divorce, expensive suit, watch that probably cost more than my first car, was laying out the case with the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won. The inheritance was received in January of 2023, Webb continued, gesturing with a leather portfolio that matched his briefcase. 18 months into the marriage, under state law, any assets acquired during the marriage are subject to equitable distribution. My client sacrificed years of her life supporting this union. She deserves her fair share. Monica nodded along, her face arranged into an expression of solemn dignity, playing the role of the devoted wife who'd been wronged, the victim. I looked at her and remembered my father's face 3 years ago when I'd told him I was getting married. The way his expression had shifted from happy to concerned to carefully neutral in about 5 seconds. "She's after the money," he'd said later that night, pulling me into his study after the engagement dinner. "I've seen women like her before, son. I know the type." I'd exploded, called him paranoid, judgmental, a cynic who couldn't be happy for me. We didn't speak for 2 months after that fight. I'd made Monica promise not to bring it up, told her dad was just being overprotective, that he'd come around eventually. He never brought it up again, never said another bad word about her. Came to the wedding, gave a gracious toast, bought us an expensive gift, a set of crystal decanters that Monica put in storage because they didn't match our aesthetic. But he'd been watching, always watching, waiting to be proven right. Judge Patricia Morrison, 63 years old, 28 years on the bench according to the nameplate on her desk, was listening carefully to Webb's arguments, taking notes. Her face was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. My stomach was in knots. My attorney, Robert Chen, 47, family law specialist, came highly recommended, had assured me we had a strong case, sat calmly next to me reviewing documents. But watching Monica's lawyer perform, watching the judge's careful attention, I felt doubt creeping in. What if she actually pulled this off? What if my father's entire legacy got split down the middle because I'd been stupid enough to marry someone who'd been playing the long game all along? Monica caught my eye across the courtroom, and she smiled, just slightly, just enough for me to see. A smirk, really, the kind of expression that said, "I'm about to win, and you can't stop me." That's when Robert stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit documentation regarding the nature and structure of the inheritance in question." He walked forward with a folder, thick, at least 30 pages inside, maybe 40. Set it on the judge's bench with the careful deliberation of someone delivering a bomb in a polite package. The courtroom went quiet. I'm David Warren, 34 years old, and my father was the kind of man who built empires while other people were still figuring out their careers. Thomas Warren started in commercial real estate at 23, buying distressed properties in markets everyone else had written off, renovating them, flipping them for profit, or holding them for rental income. By 30, he owned 12 properties. By 40, he owned 47. By the time he died at 66, his portfolio included office buildings, retail spaces, apartment complexes, and industrial warehouses across 3 states. Total value, approximately $8 million. He'd done it all himself. No family money, no inheritance, no lucky breaks. Just 40 years of calculated risks, ruthless negotiation, and an instinct for value that bordered on supernatural. He'd tried to teach me the business. Took me to property viewings when I was a teenager, showed me how to read market trends, explained cap rates and ROI and depreciation schedules. But I'd gone a different direction. Marketing, MBA, corporate job at a tech company where I made good money and had reasonable hours and didn't have to worry about tenant disputes at 2 a.m. Dad never judged me for it. Just said, "Build your own thing, son. Don't feel obligated to take mine." But he'd always made it clear. When he died, everything would go to me, his only child, his legacy. I met Monica 3.5 years ago at a friend's wedding. She was a bridesmaid, beautiful, charming, laughed at my jokes, seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my work. We dated for 8 months before I proposed, got married 6 months after that, in a ceremony that cost $47,000 and was mostly planned by Monica's mother. Dad came to the wedding, smiled in all the photos, danced with Monica at the reception, told me he hoped I'd be happy. But that That night in his study 3 days after the ceremony, he'd said what he really thought. "She's after the money. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you're in love, but I've been watching her, David. The way she looks at the properties when we drive by, the way she asks questions about the business, the way she calculates. You're being paranoid. She has her own career. She doesn't need my money. She's a dental hygienist making $40,000 a year. You think she doesn't notice the difference between her life and yours? So what? I'm supposed to only marry someone as wealthy as me? That's incredibly elitist, Dad. I'm saying marry someone who loves you for you, not for what you have, or what I have, since it'll be yours someday. Monica loves me. I hope you're right." He'd looked at me with something like sadness. "I really do. But if I'm right instead, I want you to know I'm handling it." "Handling what?" "Making sure you're protected, just in case." I'd stormed out, didn't talk to him for 2 months. Monica had been sympathetic, supportive, never once said, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. Eventually, Dad and I reconciled. Surface level, polite, but something had shifted. He never criticized Monica again, never brought up his concerns, just watched and waited. The first year of marriage was good, great even. Monica was affectionate, supportive, interested in my life. We traveled, Hawaii, Costa Rica, a 2-week trip to Italy that she planned down to the last detail. She quit her dental hygiene job 6 months in, said she wanted to focus on building our home, which seemed reasonable enough. The second year was different. She started asking more questions about Dad's properties, how much they were worth, what would happen to them when he died, whether I'd inherit everything or if there were other family members involved. "Just curious," she'd say when I asked why she wanted to know. "It's a big responsibility. I want to understand what we'd be dealing with." We, like it was already hers. She also started spending more. Designer clothes, expensive skincare routines, a new car she said she needed because her Honda was embarrassing. I made decent money, about $140,000 a year, but Monica was spending like we had triple that. When I mentioned it, she got defensive. "I gave up my career for this marriage. For you. I deserve to have nice things." I'd been married for 20 months when Dad got diagnosed. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that moves fast and doesn't give you options. The oncologist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, 23 years in oncology, kind eyes and terrible news, gave him 6 months to a year. He lasted 8 weeks. During those 8 weeks, Monica was perfect. Visited Dad in the hospital, brought him food he couldn't eat, sat with him when I had to work. She cried when he died, held my hand through the funeral, hugged relatives she'd never met. The performance was flawless. 11 days after the funeral, I came home to find Monica sitting at the kitchen table with a manila envelope in front of her. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About us. About our marriage." She pushed the envelope toward me. "I'm filing for divorce." The world tilted. "What?" "I haven't been happy for a while. I tried to make it work, but I can't do this anymore. Your timing is incredible. My father just died. I know. I'm sorry, but waiting wouldn't make it easier." I opened the envelope. Divorce petition. Already filed. Attorney already retained. Marcus Webb from Webb & Associates, family law specialists. "You've been planning this." "I've been thinking about it. Your father's death just made me realize life's too short to stay in a marriage that isn't working." "Life's too short? Or the inheritance just came through?" Her face went cold. "That's incredibly insulting." "Is it? Because the timing seems awfully convenient. I don't want to fight about this, David. I just want to move forward. Amicably." Amicably. That word would come back to haunt her. The inheritance had technically been finalized 3 weeks before Dad died. His estate attorney, Patricia Chen, no relation to my lawyer Robert, 61 years old, 34 years of estate planning experience, sharp as a knife, had handled everything. The properties, the accounts, the investments. All of it transferred according to the terms of Dad's will. Total value, $8.3 million, slightly more than expected because of some property appreciation in the final months. Monica knew the exact number. I told her when it was finalized, thinking we were partners who shared information, thinking I could trust her with the knowledge. 3 weeks later, Dad died. 11 days after that, she filed for divorce. The math wasn't complicated. Her petition, filed through Marcus Webb, claimed that the inheritance was marital property because it had been received during our marriage. Under state law, assets acquired during marriage are subject to equitable distribution in divorce. Translation, she wanted half, $4 million, for being married to me when my father died. Robert Chen explained it to me in his office 3 days after I received the petition. "She's going to argue that anything you received while married is community property. Inheritance has some protections, but the law varies by state and by circumstances. What are our chances? Honestly, it could go either way. Judges have discretion in these cases. If she can convince the court she contributed to the marriage in meaningful ways, she might get a percentage. She contributed by spending my money and quitting her job. That's not how courts see it. Homemaking has value. Supporting a spouse has value, even if she only did it for 2.5 years. So she might actually get $4 million for filing divorce papers 11 days after my father's funeral." Robert was quiet for a moment. "There's something else. Something your father did that might change things." "What?" "6 months before he died, he made some changes to his estate structure. I don't have all the details yet, but his attorney Patricia mentioned it when I contacted her for documentation. She's sending everything over." "What kind of changes?" "I don't know yet, but your father was a very careful man. Let's wait and see. The months leading up to the hearing were brutal. Monica moved out immediately, into an apartment I later learned she'd been looking at for weeks before filing. She hired Marcus Webb, who came with a reputation for aggressive tactics and big wins in high-asset divorces. She also started positioning herself as the victim, told friends I'd been emotionally distant, said the marriage had been difficult and she'd tried everything, never mentioned the timing, never mentioned the inheritance, just painted herself as a woman who'd finally found the courage to leave an unhappy situation. Meanwhile, her lawyer was building the case that she deserved half of everything. They documented her contributions to the marriage, giving up her career, ignoring that she'd quit a $40K job, managing our household, ignoring that we'd had a cleaning service, supporting me emotionally, ignoring that she'd filed for divorce less than 2 weeks after my father died. They also documented our lifestyle, the trips, the cars, the nice restaurants, arguing that she'd become accustomed to a certain standard of living that should be maintained. All of it built toward one goal, convincing the judge that $4 million was reasonable compensation for 2.5 years of marriage. Robert filed counter motions, documented the timeline, the inheritance, Dad's death, her immediate filing, documented her spending, documented the fact that she'd never contributed financially to the marriage beyond 6 months of dental hygiene income early on, but he also kept mentioning those changes Dad had made. I'm still waiting on the complete documentation from Patricia, he said every time I asked, but I think your father anticipated this. I think he prepared for it. The hearing was set for 6 months after the initial filing. I barely slept the night before, kept running scenarios in my head. What if the judge sided with her? What if 40 years of my father's work got cut in half because I'd been stupid enough to marry someone who was playing me from the beginning? Monica showed up looking like $1 million, literally. The dress, the hair, the confidence. She'd already been looking at condos. I'd heard through a mutual friend who'd seen her at an open house in the expensive part of town, already planning how to spend money she hadn't won yet. Marcus Webb was equally confident. You could see it in how he moved, how he presented. This was a slam dunk to him. Grieving widow, technically still married, but close enough. Deserves her share. Open and shut. Judge Patricia Morrison took her seat at exactly 10:30 a.m., read through some preliminary documents, asked both sides if they were ready to proceed. Webb went first, laid out the timeline, the law, the reasoning, made Monica sound like a saint who'd sacrificed everything for a marriage that hadn't worked out through no fault of her own. Your Honor, my client sacrificed her career, her independence, her earning potential to support this marriage. She dedicated herself fully to being a partner, a homemaker, a spouse, and just as the marriage reaches a point of receiving significant assets, she's expected to walk away with nothing? That's not equitable distribution. That's not justice. The judge listened, nodded occasionally, wrote notes. The inheritance was received in January 2023, Webb continued, 18 months into the marriage, clearly marital property. My client is entitled to her fair share. We believe 50% is reasonable given the length of the marriage and her contributions. Monica sat there looking appropriately serious, nodding along, playing her part perfectly. I felt sick watching her perform, watching the judge consider, watching my father's legacy hang in the balance because I'd ignored his warnings. Then Robert stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to submit documentation regarding the structure of the inheritance my client received. He walked forward with that folder, set it down gently, stepped back. Judge Morrison opened it, started reading. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. She flipped a page, then another. Her expression changed gradually. Surprise, then understanding, then something that might have been amusement. Monica shifted in her seat, sensing something was wrong. The judge read for 3 full minutes. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional shuffle of paper. Marcus Webb was trying to look confident, but you could see tension creeping into his shoulders. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up. Counselor, she said to Webb, did you review the trust documents before filing this petition? Webb's face twitched slightly. We were informed that the inheritance transferred directly to Mr. Warren as the beneficiary of his father's estate. It didn't. The judge held up the papers. 6 months before his death, Thomas Warren established an irrevocable trust. Every asset, every property, every account, every investment was placed into this trust with an independent third-party trustee. Monica's carefully maintained expression cracked, just slightly, just enough. The beneficiary, Mr. Warren, receives distributions at the trustee's discretion for approved purposes, but the assets themselves never became his personal property. They remain in the trust structure, managed by the trustee, according to the terms Mr. Warren's father established. Webb was frantically flipping through his notes now, looking for something, finding nothing. And these trust documents, the judge continued, explicitly protect the assets from claims by creditors, lawsuits, and, she paused, looked directly at Monica. Divorce proceedings. The assets cannot be divided. They cannot be attached. They cannot be claimed by a spouse. Monica's face went white, then red. Her hands, which had been folded calmly in her lap, started trembling. Your Honor, Webb tried. Surely there's precedent for piercing trust structures in divorce cases. cases. If the trust was created to defraud, it wasn't created to defraud anyone. It was created 6 months before Thomas Warren died, when his son had been happily married for 2 years. There's no evidence of fraudulent intent, just careful estate planning by a man who understood asset protection. The judge closed the folder, looked at Webb, looked at Monica. Your petition for asset division regarding the inheritance is denied. Completely. Mrs. Warren has no claim to any portion of the trust assets, the distributions from the trust, or any property held within the trust structure. Monica made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, something strangled and desperate. Webb was already packing his briefcase, couldn't get out fast enough. Your Honor, we'd like to request time to review these documents and potentially— Judge Morrison cut him off with a wave. You had 6 months to review the estate structure, Counselor. Your client filed 11 days after the decedent's death. If you didn't do your due diligence, that's not the court's problem. She looked at Monica again. Her expression wasn't quite sympathy, more like recognition, like she'd seen this play before and knew exactly how it ended. Nice try, Counselor, she said to Webb, and she actually smiled when she said it. Monica turned to me as the judge was gathering her papers. Her mouth was open, eyes wild, looking for some explanation, some angle, some way this could still work in her favor. I thought about my father, sitting in his study 3 years ago, warning me about her, telling me he saw what was coming long before I ever did. I'm handling it, he'd said, making sure you're protected. He hadn't needed me to listen, hadn't needed me to believe him. He'd just quietly, methodically, built a fortress around everything he'd worked for, made sure that when the moment came, when Monica showed her true colors, there would be nothing for her to take. I didn't say anything to her, didn't gloat, didn't lecture, just stood up, nodded to Robert, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Monica's voice, high, desperate, breaking. This isn't fair. This isn't— I gave up everything for him. Everything. I deserve— I kept walking. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Monica got nothing except a lawyer's bill she couldn't pay. Marcus Webb had worked on contingency, expecting a percentage of the settlement, and when that settlement turned out to be zero, he sent her an invoice for $47,000 in fees she couldn't afford. She tried to negotiate, tried to claim he should have known about the trust structure, that his negligence had cost her millions. He countered that she'd withheld information, never mentioned my father's concerns, never considered that a wealthy man might protect his assets, and that her decision to file 11 days after the funeral had been against his advice. They settled eventually. She paid him $20,000 over 2 years, moved back in with her parents, got a job at a different dental practice, making less than she'd made before because she'd been out of work for 3 years. I heard all this through mutual acquaintances, people who'd been at our wedding, who'd watched the whole thing unfold, who couldn't resist sharing updates about Monica's downfall. I didn't enjoy it, didn't feel victorious, just felt tired and grateful and sad that my father had been right about something I desperately wanted him to be wrong about. 6 months after the divorce, I met with Patricia Chen to go over the trust structure in detail. Your father came to me 7 months before he died, she explained. Said he wanted to protect his assets from future complications. Wouldn't elaborate, just said he needed everything locked down tight. He knew, he suspected, and he was careful. The trust structure is ironclad. I've seen people try to challenge these things, and they never win. Your father made sure of that. She pulled out another document. He also left this for you. Asked me to give it to you after everything settled. A letter. In my father's handwriting. David, if you're reading this, 2 things are probably true. I'm gone, and Monica showed her real colors. I hope I'm wrong about the second part. I really do. Nothing would make me happier than being proven paranoid. But if I'm right, if she filed for divorce after I died, if she came after the money, I want you to know I took care of it. Everything is protected. She can't touch it. You're safe. I'm sorry I couldn't convince you 3 years ago. I'm sorry I had to protect you like this instead of you protecting yourself. But I'd rather be the paranoid father who was right than the trusting father who left you vulnerable. Build something good with this, son. Build something that matters. And next time, if there is a next time, find someone who loves you even if you had nothing. Those people exist. Your mother was one of them. Don't settle for less. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times, cried through the second and third. Patricia gave me privacy, left me alone in her conference room for 20 minutes while I processed. My father had seen it coming, had warned me, had been ignored, and had protected me anyway. Not because he needed me to believe him, not because he needed to be proven right, but because that's what fathers do. They protect their children, even when those children are too stubborn or too in love or too naive to protect themselves.